us we have Alastair Phillips. He's Professor of Film Studies at the University of Warwick. His research specialises in Japanese film. So he is co-editor of a number of publications, including Japanese Cinema Book with Hideaki Fujiki and the BFI, and also Japanese Cinema Text and Context with Julian Springer. So tonight is the book launch of his book Tokyo Story. So as you probably already know, Tokyo Story is a highly celebrated family drama directed by Ozu Yasujirō in 1953. It's acknowledged as one of the most significant Japanese films ever made. So in his book, Alastair Phillips combines a close analysis of the film and its key locations with a discussion of its representation of Japanese society at a time of great cultural change. But he's going to tell you more about this, speaking about his book and the film today. So I'll hand over to you, Alastair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Izzy, and thank you everybody for coming this evening. I hope the event's going to be an enjoyable one. I've got a few thank yous before I begin my presentation. I'm probably going to talk for about 40 minutes about the book. I'm going to read some brief parts of the book to you and speak about them, and there'll be time for questions. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts about either what I say or about the film indeed that many of you might already have seen. So thank you very much, Izzy, and also to Nana for so kindly arranging this event. I'm really delighted that it's taking place here. I can't think of a better venue, really, for Anglo-Japanese Foundation that Daiwa provides, speaking to my positions about one of the most widely celebrated Japanese films, and indeed a film classic, which was why I wrote about it in the BFI Film Classics series. I'm absolutely delighted that my editor Rebecca Barden is here this evening. I've worked with Rebecca for many years on various projects, and I'm particularly proud of this one. And I can't think of a film that I wish I could have written. Another film I wish I could have written other than this one for the BFI Film Classic series. There are many people who's behind the scenes of this book. I just very briefly want to say thank you to them. There are other people at Bloomsbury Publishing, the home of BFI Publishing, who helped me along the way, but I particularly want to say thank you to Sophie Contento, who was the production editor on this project. And she's unfortunately unable to be here tonight, and I now sound like I'm an Oscar Award nominee. But it was Sophie, really. If you have a chance to look at the book, there are some copies in the building this evening. You'll see that it's absolutely beautiful, and a lot of that beauty is down to Sophie's vision for the project. She and I had hours of really really enjoyable time kind of discussing the look of the book. I also really want to say thank you to the British Academy and the Great British South Sakawa Foundation, both of whom helped contribute to funding this project. And then finally, of course, my home institution where I work. I'm very fortunate to work in the Film and Television Studies at the University of Warwick, which has supported me in numerous ways over the years. I'm blessed with many wonderful colleagues, a couple of whom are here this evening, but most of all I feel very blessed to have such wonderful students who I've talked to about this film for so many years. And when you become a sub-teacher, particularly at university, you never feel you own something, you just share something with other people, and this book is very much a collaboration between myself and the students that I've worked with. So I'm going to begin with the beginning of the book. On New Year's Day, 1953, writing from his new home in the coastal city of Kamakura, the community where he now lies buried, the renowned Japanese film director Yasujirō Ozu noted the strong wind blowing outside. He drank heated sake and enjoyed the warmth of his kotatsu, a traditional low wooden table covered with a futon and a charcoal brazier positioned underneath. Reflecting on his life and perhaps also considering the film script that he was to shortly begin work on the following month with his long-term collaborator Noda Kogo, he recorded his intentions for the coming year: to not drink too much, to look after his health, to watch lots of films, to not covet things too greatly, and to do his very best at work. Something that I also try to live up to. Despite then being seen as one of the grandmasters of contemporary Japanese cinema, and certainly one of Shochiku Studio's most valuable economic assets, Ozu himself could hardly have anticipated how the passage of time would treat the film that he went on to complete and release that year. Tokyo Monogatari is now recognised as one of the very finest accomplishments of international film history. In the 2012 Sight and Sound poll of the 100 greatest films of all time, film directors from all over the world voted it number one, with the film coming third amongst a similarly diverse body of film critics and scholars from around the world. And we're just on the cusp of the announcement of the next generation of the BFI poll in December next month. It'll be interesting to see where Tokyo Story remains placed in that same poll. Tokyo Story is specifically a film about the flow of time, and it marks this trajectory through a series of locations that inform the internal structure of my book. In one sense, a family drama telling the story of an elderly couple's single visit to the Japanese capital to visit their adult children and grandchildren. The film also has an unusually dynamic narrative that looks back to the losses of Japan's long Pacific War and forward to the uncertain social and material changes then underway in Japanese society with the recent end of the American occupation. The parents' train journey from the provincial coastal town of Onomichi to Tokyo thus ends up being but one of a series of journeys that the film depicts, suggests, or occludes, with its uniquely resonant sense of space and movement being visible from its famous initial sequence of establishing shots. Within the pictorial and oral patterning of these 5 remarkable shots, all of which have their own unique reverberations, lies the heart of Tokyo Story and its mesmerising interest in ordinary lives lived in motion. This suggestive arrangement of sound and image may currently speak of a story yet to unfold, but when we revisited Secrets at the end of the film and hear and see its repetition, a sense of attentive, almost healing completion emerges. This, for me, emphatically replaces the initial idea of a line and its inevitable implication of disappearance with the expression of something altogether more cyclical. In so doing, the film therefore also contains the suggestion of perpetual renewal and return, something one might say that also speaks to Tokyo Story's enduring reputation as a masterpiece of global cinema with its own unique form of intergenerational appeal. Tokyo Story is indeed a film that I've returned to over the years, and it continues to offer new insights as I grow older. I first watched it as an eager undergraduate film student and probably approached it then as an interesting exercise in style. When I next saw it in a crowded cinema in Tokyo a few years later, it left me absolutely devastated and unable to speak for some time afterwards. I remember being in tears at the gentle sound of Ryuchushu's voice and the rhythmic chugging of the tugboats on the tranquil waters of the inland sea. I was fascinated by the scene in which the visiting grandmother speaks to her grandson in Tokyo and wonders aloud about her old age and what will become of the young boy when she is no longer there. I studied the film closely as a postgraduate and have since gone on to teach it to generations of students willing to enter its world and unravel the secrets of its lasting emotional pull. For years, I've asked my classes why Tokyo Story is not in fact called Onomichi Story, a question I've never really been sure I could answer myself, despite obviously wanting to know what others thought. And in some ways, I think this book is an attempt to formulate my response, finally. So in this book, I prioritise the question of place in several ways. I begin by positioning Ozu as a citizen of Tokyo and explore how the various strands of the film's production history intersected closely with its subject of representation. Far from seeing Ozu as a timeless, somewhat distant aesthete, I've sought to localise him and provide a set of more intimate historical markers in my coverage of the film's gestation. As Donald Ritchie wrote long ago, Ozu always feels it's important to keep our bearings. And I follow through on this idea by anchoring my discussion in terms of the politics and aesthetics of location. Having one's bearings meant many different things for Ozu. It could be the positioning of the camera, the framing of a doorway, or the decision to cut from one character to another across the space of a room. But these compositional decisions always required a degree of proximity and temporal sensitivity that also had profound ethical and emotional repercussions. In Tokyo Story, this was true in terms of how the film reckoned with the turning point it occupied within the flux of Japan's post-war modernity. Ozu's film is especially sensitive to the historical shape of female experience, and I therefore explore how its protagonists navigate the city's different spaces in ways that also generate a moving sense of the time they find themselves in. Tokyo Story may be a consensual film, but I believe it incorporates many different shades of the past and the present. I then go on to consider Tokyo Story's reception and critical standing in both Japan and the rest of the world. I've lost my slides. I think I'll just leave it there. So I then go on to talk about the reception and critical standing of the film in Japan and the rest of the world. And I argue that one important dimension of the film's status as a film classic is its capacity to not just speak to the canon of Japanese film history, but also the shifting priorities of global cinema. And the book concludes, as I will today in my talk, with a brief account of my own journey from Tokyo to Onomichi, as I retrace the various locations of the film and consider these encounters in the context of today. Tokyo Story's status as a film classic is surely down to a combination of all these things. It's a marker of a transformational moment in Japanese and international film culture, but it also has the capacity to speak beyond geographical boundaries in ways that recognise the universal human experience of everyday family relations. And most importantly, it achieves this as a film, using Ozu's profound understanding of the spatio-temporal potential of cinema to tell us what it might be like to be in the world, in one place, at one time. So these are two slides that speak to what I wanted to express about the emphasis on female subjectivity. This is a slide that refers to the Japanese reception of the film, and here is Ozu himself working again. So Noda, Ozu's screenwriter's original intention had been to depict the intergenerational selfishness inherent in family life, with Ozu similarly interested in the degree of antipathy that children may end up feeling from the character and lifestyle of their parents. All of this remains present in the film, with characters such as the deliciously cunning daughter Hirayama Shige, played by one of my favourite Japanese actresses of the time, Sugimura Haruko, plotting to pack her visiting parents off to the hot spring resort of Atami. And the undistinguished and emotionally indifferent Hirayama Koichi, compelled to care more for his neighbourhood patients than his elderly mother and father. What properly distinguishes the outcome of the pair's collaboration, however, is the complex emotional, temporal, and spatial geography of the Hirayama family's circumstances. Tokyo Story is a far more compassionate and finely nuanced film than might first be assumed, and I think this is undoubtedly one of the most important underlying factors that explain its enduring status as a classic film. And I just briefly want to explore two contexts that help inform this position: the broader structure of Japanese post-war family life, and Ozu's own acute interest in dramatic architecture in relation to the form of the Japanese family drama. Tokyo Story was the first original screenplay that Ozu and Noda had developed since the end of the US occupation of Japan on the 28th of April 1952. The film therefore provided a timely opportunity to evaluate recent changes to the Japanese family system, with it now being almost 5 years since the enactment of key revisions to Japan's Civil Code in 1948, enabling firmer legal equality within the institution of domestic marriage, and a greater degree of freedom being accorded to the individual rights of family members outside the traditional patriarchal security of the family home. By 1953, Japan's material prosperity was beginning to improve with the development of new economic opportunities in the major urban conurbations of the Kansai and Kanto regions, home respectively to the two cities of Osaka and Tokyo that feature in the film. These social and economic changes had profound repercussions for how ordinary Japanese people internalized the progressive narrative of material and ethical regeneration offered by the legacy of the occupation. On the one hand, the post-war period had encouraged a sense of opportunity and growth, and an increased level of investment in the active participation of nation building. But on the other, it had also problematized the relationship with the recent past, especially when articulated through a lingering affiliation between the traditional family system and private memories of the militarist experiment that had led to the country's defeat in World War II. In his groundbreaking monograph on the director, Donald Ritchie famously, and I think mistakenly, asserted that Ozu had but one major subject, the Japanese family, and but one major theme, its dissolution. But instead of such a broad sociological approach, one that also assumed an undifferentiated pattern of permanent structural change, what typically really interested the director, I think, was the moral dimension of people's various behaviours in relation to circumstances. Importantly, therefore, what became of most significant dramatic interest in Tokyo's story was not so much the claim or the event of family breakdown itself, but the way in which the central question of one's responsibilities to one's parents could reveal different intentions in terms of accommodating the past, the present, and the imagined future of both the family and the country in general. This approach had enormous commercial appeal that also raised questions about tone and form. Nodo and I did not expect to see people weeping when they saw our work, Ozu said in a newspaper article published not long after the film had been released. We simply tried to depict the naked relationship between parents and children without either denying or idealising it, he wrote. We assumed it would be satisfying for us as authors if the audience neither saw goodness or evil, but somehow that encouraged them to show filial devotion towards their parents. Ozu's remarks here clearly point to both the film's generosity of spirit towards the choices made within one single family at the time, and the film's concurrent ability to simultaneously provoke personal reflection on the part of the viewer many generations on. But what is also particularly interesting here is the uncertain duality between excessive emotion and descriptive realism, something which may be seen as one further key to the film's original success. Ozu himself would later state that he felt Tokyo's Story to be the most melodramatic of his films, perhaps meaning that he was aware of its relatively instrumental plot structure and the affecting death of the principal wife and mother, Tommy. But he might well have been considering how the film's profound emotional resonance also related to his well-established audience appeal as a director who favoured a predominantly popular female audience who were themselves by then experiencing enormous social change. For many, Tokyo Story's global reputation as a film classic primarily rests on the affecting quality of its carefully managed images of human interaction and human separation. And this is certainly how we do follow the journey of Shukichi and Tommy from Onomichi to the capital and back again. The development of these contemplative visual threads and interlocking patterns was an integral part of the intensive collaborative script writing process between Ozu and Noda that lasted a total of 103 days in the first half of 1953. In the handling of this material, Noda and Ozu were clearly seeking to reinvigorate an existing set of aesthetic principles based on the structuring of intimate quotidian events around a particular dramatic context related to the pressures faced by individuals or families. In the case of Tokyo's story, the complexity of the various social and psychological pressures facing the different protagonists was handled with typical precision, to the point of what Tony Raines terms diagrammatic clarity. And it's this question of internal design that's not only critical to an understanding of Noda and Ozu's working method, but also its consequences when it comes to dramatic form. And in part this takes us back to Ozu's characterisation as his most melodramatic feature to date. But it also, I think, relates to an important strand in Ozu criticism articulated by Yoshida Kiju, who primarily sees the film in terms of the way it seeks to straddle what Ozu himself termed the dramatic and the accidental. Yoshida has famously recounted how Ozu's final words to him when dying were that cinema is drama, not accident. And we may briefly consider this aphorism in the light of three predominant characteristics within the narrative organisation of the script. The absence, in fact, of any significant dramatic catalyst in terms of story progression, and the emphasis instead on mundane but carefully plotted and revealing human interaction. The importance of dramatic parallelism, something originally noticed by Donald Ritchie, whereby certain key events or personal circumstances are echoed or inverted elsewhere, and the intriguing but prominent use of ellipses at certain points within the otherwise linear progression of the plot. It's these aspects that point to a subtle orchestration of internal elements that apply an emphatic dramatic structure with the implied effect of contingency. As Ozu himself put it, when reflecting on his narrative method, rather than tell a superficial story, I wanted to go deeper, to show the ever-changing uncertainties of life. So instead of constantly pushing dramatic action to the fore, I left empty spaces so that viewers could have a pleasant aftertaste to savour. Just want to check how I'm doing for time. Okay. Excuse me. I think what I'll do is I'm going to move to a clip, so I'm just going to jump a little bit and we'll watch a little bit of the film.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to do is just use this clip really to introduce to you kind of on the screen some of the things I've been thinking about and talking about, and give you a chance to sort of see Ozu's method in practice, as it were. I've chosen a section of the film that's almost hardly ever been properly discussed. Thank you. But I do think it's a very kind of interesting and fundamental kind of moment in the film that allowed me, when I was working on it, to see more clearly what I thought about the rest of the film and some of these things that I've been talking about. So I'm aware that some of you know the film and some of you might not have seen it before. So what we're going to see is somewhere around the middle of the film, with the parents having kind of arrived in Tokyo, received the limited hospitality from their children. They've sort of been sent off on a kind of rather unfulfilling kind of bus tour of the main sites of the city, and they have been invited to their daughter-in-law, Noriko's central character of Noriko, the daughter-in-law's apartment, and this is the first time that we see Noriko's home life and its introduction, therefore, to her world as well as to the hospitality which she will in turn offer her visiting parents-in-law. So I'm just going to set this up and then I'll stop and start a couple of times. So we're going to move from sort of the centre of the city to Noriko's Danchi building, her kind of apartment block building, which we'll see neatly demonstrates her class position within this new post-war Japanese economy. It's shared low-cost public housing, and it was a system that especially entailed the provision of more modern amenities for younger, aspirational working women like Noriko herself. What interests me in this sequence we're going to see in a moment is that having kind of left the parents and Noriko in the city centre, we don't initially get reintroduced to Noriko in her apartment. Instead, we see a young woman seated on the floor of a one-room apartment folding laundry. There's a knock on the door, and in the next shot, we'll see Noriko enter as the sleeping child visible on the floor right. She's here to borrow some sake for her in-laws, and it's clear she's been a close neighbour to this mother for some time. We're going to then cut to Noriko in the public corridor and observe the everyday clutter of this block before a close-up of the door of her own apartment from inside as she returns home. I'm going to pause here. So what I want to argue here is that none of these details are accidental, even if the flow of information remains somewhat unconventional in narrative terms. Where, for example, are the parents-in-law? With great economy, Ozu prefers to initially establish Noriko as an independent domestic agent, marked by both mobility, the toing and froing between the rooms, and an empathetic conception of female space which is shared by two women of the same age. It's a pattern that's reignited right at the end of the film with Noriko's conversation with her sister-in-law Kyoko in Onomichi, and her eventual return by train to the world we've just seen pictured in these opening shots. Importantly too, Noriko is only able to host Yukichi and Tomi because, like Kyoko, she's not a parent herself. Her presence is thus in part based around an absence, and it's this sense of presence in absence that now forms the most significant spatial and affective resonance of the sequence as it progresses. The film's orchestration of the unfolding conversation brings the past of Onomichi into the present of Tokyo, and at the same time charts a new means of understanding each protagonist's relationship with the future to come. At the heart of these tensions lies the intimate personal legacy of the Pacific War and the failure of Shukichi and Tomi's son and Noriko's husband, Shoji, to return from military conflict in China. So you have Noriko kind of closing the door behind her, and then we cut to the parents. But what is so important in that kind of juxtaposition of those two shots is Noriko's gaze off screen, and then her gaze being met as the parents turn around, kind of creating this bond between them. But at the same time, at the centre of the frame, and therefore at the centre of this triangulation that's been established by the film, is the photograph here of the dead son and also the dead husband. So Noriko, therefore, is a single woman in the city, confronted like many women of her generation in Japan, with a significant double absence: the husband and the children that were never born. It's this perception that allows her to facilitate her empathetic relationship with her in-laws, for all parties share the same awareness of loss, even if one is tempered more by a sense of what has been, i.e. the parents, and the other more by what will now never be, i.e. the daughter-in-law. All of this is enacted in the subsequent set of shots that we've seen that brings the three into a new configuration that also includes shoji as a central point of reference in the form of both a photograph and the spoken word.
鎌倉です。お友達が撮ってくださって。そう。いつ頃の？戦争に行く前の年です。そう。まばゆそうな顔をして。
これも首を曲げとるな。
あの子の癖でしたな。なに？どこに到着？あ、なんか。洗ったのは？ね、これ持ってく？今のネタの美味しいのよ。ありがとう。いただいてくわ。すいません、食べいいえ。
Okay, I'm going to pause there. So, just to recap, we've already seen Noriko enter her room and Ozu cutting to a medium two-shot of Shukichi and Tomi gazing at the photograph of their son in the centre of the image. And we've seen the pair turn immediately in unison and meet Noriko's gaze off screen. Their conversation about how the photograph was taken in Kamakura the year before Shoji was conscripted thus reveals that the younger married couple had been living in the capital for some time before his death. I think the rapid pace of the editing here reiterates the spatial and emotional force field now existing between the three. And for me, this is one of the most dynamically staged and intensely felt compositional arrangements in the film, since it preserves so many different feelings, all belonging to a specific location and time. These include Onomichi, the place that Shoji grew up and where Shukichi and Tomi have just arrived from. Kamakura, the time before the realities of the war. And of course Tokyo itself, where Shoji's parents can now only find him in the form of a distant recollection. And so I think we arrive in this sequence at the final Tokyo of the various Tokyos that Shukichi and Tomi have come to visit. The city their dead son once inhabited and shared with his wife. But finally, before I move on, I just want to note that Noriko's small apartment is more than just a space of memorialization and stasis. It is in fact, I think, entirely possible to imagine that she's put the photograph out, especially for her parents-in-law to gaze at. And as she pops out again, you might have noticed, to borrow a flask for Shukichi's sake from next door, perhaps it's too difficult to see in the first shot. It's there, in fact. There's a box of American laundry detergent, Rinso, next to the door. So you've got this sort of whole constellation of the past, the present, and this sort of mobile sense of independence and female interconnectivity, all kind of circulating in this important sequence, which, because it hasn't been staged in one room, but between a set of two rooms, activates, I think, some of the larger patterns of Tokyo's story. Because I want to move from the film back to myself and just conclude really with something that happened as in the course of writing on this book, which was my own journey from Tokyo to Onomichi, as I said, in reverse order from the journey that the parents in the film made from the port town to the capital. So, in a series of balmy early autumn days before the pandemic, I spent a magical week in Tokyo, visiting various libraries and archives in search of Tokyo's story. At the Kawakuta Memorial Film Institute, I was given precious access to one of Ozu's original scripts for the film, and I reflected on the director's diary entry quoted at the beginning of the presentation. I tried not to covet its neat methodical pages too much. In my spare time I drank and ate and wandered the back streets to sense the everyday vitality I love so much about the city. One sunny afternoon I took a train and got off at Kita Kamakura, the station where Hara Setsuko begins her journey to the capital in Ozu's late spring. I wandered up to the tranquil leafy grounds of Engakuji, the Zen Buddhist temple where Ozu now lies buried. It took some time to find his grave, but I located it in the recesses of the sloping grounds. Its black stone marked by a single character, Mu, was surrounded by flowers and offerings of small sake bottles. It had been raining and there was a shining pool of water on the top that reflected the tall sotoba, or inscribed sticks of wood, gathered behind. In the sky above, a hawk circled. I moved on to visit Chigasaki-kan, the inn where Ozu and Noda wrote the script I had recently held in my hands. The place today is well kept and preserves an orderly and hospitable warmth. Ozu's association with the inn is commemorated by various items of memorabilia, but the true potency of the place resides in the simplicity of the room in which he stayed. There was a beautiful seasonal flower arrangement by the window, a photograph of which accompanied me while I was writing the book. On the wooden ceiling above, you can still make out the stains from the cooking oil used in the preparation of the many meals that Ozu shared with Noda and his fellow film professionals. The pines and shrubs in the garden have now grown, and you can no longer see the sea, but you can still smell it, fleetingly, in the breeze. Late that afternoon, I took another train to stay with friends in Osaka. I didn't feel ill, like Tommy, and was able to resume my journey a few days later to Onomichi. There, I succumbed immediately to the town's spell, and finally felt able to understand Ozu's remarkable choice of locale. Its hills are steep and the paths into them are winding, and at times confusing. From Jojoji, I looked out at the town and coastal landscape below, and was thrilled to see and also hear the regular passage of the trains that still intersect the community. The atmospheric island geography of the inland sea is present from every vantage point. That evening, I stayed in an old sailor's lodgings and ate fresh sushi in a restaurant near the waterside. I spent several days in Onomichi photographing different locations. One night there was a festival, and several streets in the main district were illuminated by lights and candles. Crowds of families and young children gathered to share the experience. I came to realise that Onomichi was a place in transition. The timeless tranquility of the town, conveyed in Tokyo's story, had actually been a myth in the 1950s, one generated to manage the inherent duality of the film's narrative. Onomichi was by then already playing a significant commercial role in the industrialisation of Western Japan, and there was still evidence of this in the rusting coastal infrastructure. Its heyday, however, had clearly passed, and there were now signs of decline and depopulation in the back lanes of the town centre and the foothills above. To help regenerate the region, different kinds of businesses had come in to appeal to a burgeoning visitor trade. I visited a hipster cafe run by ex-city dwellers, a place that seemed doubly removed to me from the dusty local film museum commemorating the long-gone heyday of Japan's popular cinema. On my final morning, I returned to the railway station from where Tommy and Shukichi had once set out, and I met a group of young people asking questions of the passers-by. Why had I come to Onomichi? I told them that I'd wanted to explore the place where one of the greatest ever Japanese films, Tokyo Story, was shot. They'd never heard of it. But they were really interested in my opinions about the town today. I told them that I absolutely loved it, but I was puzzled why they wanted to know. And it turned out they'd come from Tokyo themselves and were being employed by an agency wishing to develop local tourism. So they too, like me, had made the journey from the capital and were now seeking to find ways of getting others to do the same. I looked up at the station clock. It was sadly time to go and close the circle. I smiled and said goodbye, and then, like Noiko at the end of Tokyo Story, I boarded the train to start my own long journey back along the tracks to the city that had once been hers and Ozu's home. Thanks very much, everybody.